Brandon Ingram to the Bay Area? I'll tell you why the Golden State Warriors might be desperate enough to trade for Ingram and two possible deals to get it done. It's the Monday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Monday, tipping off another week's worth of podcasts here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. We're going to look at Brandon Ingram to the Bay Area, the Golden State Warriors, in two deals that could get this done. And I think Golden State makes more sense than you might think, and I'll explain why. But there's a couple of hangups with the deal, too, and the Warriors might need to be desperate. And they might be in position to be kind of desperate as well. Then we're going to take a look at Summer League and recap it slightly for New Orleans. They went 0 for 5. Is that bad news? We'll break it all down here. And then, no, the Pelicans, if there is NBA expansion, unfortunately, I would love this, are not moving to the Eastern Conference, and I'll explain why. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down and the sports stop sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So let's get into Brandon Ingram and the Golden State Warriors. This has not been a team that's been heavily linked to Ingram, even though it makes a ton of sense for them to be. You know, they have struck out similarly to the Lakers in free agency and on the trade market so far. They did not get Paul George despite trying to figure out some sort of sign and trade for him. He's now in the East with the Philadelphia 76ers. They've been going after Lauri Markkanen right now. But is Utah actually going to trade Lauri Markkanen, or is Danny Ainge just being Danny Ainge and not actually going to trade that player unless it's for like a huge amount of players and picks, which Golden State probably isn't in position to really give up. They have a couple of future first-round picks, and they have some interesting young players, but I do think there's limits on some of those young players too, and we'll get into that in this segment here, right? When you look at the Golden State Warriors, the tradable pieces, in my opinion, in terms of players are Andrew Wiggins, who's making a little over $26 million, and that's more just salary for the matching part of it. You also have Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, two interesting young players who I wouldn't say have broken out yet whatsoever. And then you have Brandon Podziemski, who was someone I was really high on in the draft last year and has proven to be a very useful starter/rotation piece for the Golden State Warriors. And if the Utah Jazz are like, you need to give us Kuminga, Brandon Podziemski, Wiggins to make the salary work if that's even needed, and like as many first-round picks as possible, that might be too rich for the Golden State Warriors. Otherwise, maybe we would have seen a deal done by now. Do they really need to get a bigger name next to Steph Curry after losing Klay Thompson this offseason? Do they feel that that's going to make him happy? Now, I don't think he's got ill will towards the franchise, the organization, but it's not been the best summer for the Golden State Warriors, and a lot of people are writing kind of like eulogies about the run, the epic run that they've had. So would Brandon Ingram make sense, maybe as a bridge to the next generation or whatever they're building next, or just to put like a bigger name, slightly more star power next to Steph Curry or another scorer, since he's going to have to shoulder a whole lot of that load? Well, I've got two trades that make sense because, look, Ingram is going to cost less than Lauri Markkanen would. And if the Warriors are feeling desperate, you can probably figure out a way to get the deal done. So there's two trades here. And I told you last week we were going to talk about this team. So I've been thinking about these for a while. The first trade is Brandon Ingram and Jeremiah Robinson Earl in exchange for Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, and Moses Moody. This just makes some sense, right? They've got to give up a young player or two in this deal. And there would also need to be like a first-round pick involved. We can hash some of that out later, but I do think you've got to include a pick here. I don't think Wiggins has tons of value here. He's going to be making $30 million in 2 years. It's not an amazing deal. It's not a bad deal either. But Kuminga and Moody are kind of the centerpieces, giving the Pelicans probably two with Kuminga and Wiggins rotation pieces. Moody, depending on how you feel about him. The concern on New Orleans and their side with this is Kuminga and Moody are both going to be restricted free agents this coming offseason, next offseason. They're going to have to pay both those guys if you want to keep some of the pieces you got in return for Brandon Ingram. So that's something that I think might mean you need to include both of them in this deal. I don't know if they have tons and tons and tons of value. They have value, but I don't think it's like, just one of those guys is enough to get it done. And frankly, trying to figure out a deal that works within the collective bargaining agreement, within the salary cap structure of both these teams, isn't the easiest thing to do. So Wiggins, Kuminga, and Moody for Brandon Ingram and Jeremiah Robinson Earl. Wiggins can come off the bench for New Orleans. So can Kuminga. It gives you much more depth there. Or you could move Wiggins for something else, or Kuminga or Moody for something else too. This might be a way towards acquiring another starting, a new starting center. And we'll talk about some of the Pelicans' options for center from the Summer League recap in the next segment here. I think this is a fine deal for the Pelicans. I don't know if you're right now going to find anything better than this. Do the Golden State Warriors want to pay Brandon Ingram? I don't really know. Are they a team that could pay Brandon Ingram and they're less worried about the luxury tax and all of that? Yeah, I think they are. And I think that's a reason why you can maybe get this sort of deal done. The other deal is if New Orleans is looking to get, another center in. And this one is Brandon Ingram straight up for Andrew Wiggins, Kevon Looney, and Trace Jackson Davis. Looney immediately slots in as your starting center for New Orleans, and he's done a very good job there with the Golden State Warriors for multiple seasons. He's a little bit undersized. They don't play him, heavy minutes. But between Carlo Matkovic, between Yves Missi, and Daniel Tice, I think he's a better starting option than Daniel Tice is. They're similarly-ish size, two undersized small ball fives. So, that works. Again, he's not an elite rebounder. He's not really that rim protector that you want, but he can shoot the three. He can space the court. He rebounds just, enough maybe to get it done. He's better on the offensive glass, but not an elite rebounder whatsoever when it comes to, I'm looking at the wrong stats here for some of this stuff. So overall, I think you can get it done and you could pull off this sort of trade and get a new starting center in. Sorry. Looney doesn't shoot threes. I was looking at the wrong stats here. So this is someone who's done it in the past, has played, some minutes for Golden State and started for them a lot. He gives you the rebounding. I don't think he's much of a rim protector really at all, but I think you could do worse as someone that maybe makes your small ball lineups work. He's an above average rebounder. That's kind of the important thing there. Gets you just more experience, but he's very similar to Tice. So I don't know if you truly need this sort of deal done, and I tend to think of the two that I lean towards Wiggins, Kuminga, and Moody versus the other deal that brings you Kevon Looney back. And so I think you can flip those other pieces a little bit easier too. Kuminga will have value around the league. Moody you can take a chance on, and Wiggins you can see what you can do in some sort of other trade. If I were the Pelicans, that's the deal that I would take. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you like either of those two trades? Are you staying away from either of those two deals? Something that, look, the reasons why the Warriors might not do this is, does Ingram mesh with Steph Curry? Also, Steve Kerr coached Ingram on Team USA last summer, and it didn't go well. And you saw Steve Kerr taking subtle shots at Ingram about his physicality and lack thereof and reducing his minutes till Ingram got an illness and just didn't play anymore. I don't think that's really... I think that's going to be something that would hold it back. Does Steve Kerr want Brandon Ingram on the team? And if he says no, that might kill a deal. Let me know what you think in the comments down below on YouTube. So coming up next, we'll do a quick Summer League recap, look at some of the center options and look at that rotation because you got to see those minutes from those guys in Summer League. Other performances too. What should they do with that final two-way spot? That's all coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want, and all I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So you might not have basketball anymore, but the Olympics are coming up. Major League Baseball is in full swing. I was out in LA at Dodger Stadium watching Ohtani hit dingers as they beat the Boston Red Sox. You can get in on those over-unders, those player props as well. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the official sports betting partner of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. And now for your second listen, Locked On Saints training camp starts this week. Ross Jackson's going to be in Irvine at the practices, boots on the ground, covering it the whole time. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Ross Jackson is awesome. Make sure Locked On Saints is your second listen today. Become an everydayer of Locked On Pelicans. That means you listen Monday through Friday. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. So Summer League for the New Orleans Pelicans did not go well, to say the least. They went 0 for 5, losing their final game on Saturday, 91-82 to the Denver Nuggets. We don't really need to recap this game because no one really played that ended up having like that much of an impact or will have a ton of impact, I think, next season for New Orleans. So Karl Makovich didn't play in this one. Yves Missi didn't play in this one either. And Jordan Hawkins got a little bit of run before injuring himself and then just being removed from the game. But we kind of know what he's capable of as a shooter. He needs to add some more to his game. But I don't think Summer League's where you're really going to prove that. He went 0 for 3, had a very poor shooting performance in Summer League overall. So look, it's Summer League. Does going 0 for 5 mean anything? Like, truthfully, no. You talk to executives around the league, scouts around the league, and even people that prep the draft picks for Summer League. You know, in the lead up to the draft, say Yves Missi, and I don't know who he's worked with or anything like that. We're just using it as an example. You know, from when their college season ends to draft night, they're doing work, they're prepping, they're practicing, they're getting in shape, workouts, all of that stuff with a goal of like just get drafted as high as possible. Like that's their job for a couple months. Then they get drafted and they're thrown immediately into Summer League. And it's probably a little bit jarring at times for them, to be perfectly honest with you. And from talking to the trainers, the people who have worked with, you know, others in the past, we've spoken to Coach Gibson Piper, who did a lot of work with Trey Murphy to get him into the league. And when I asked him when he was on the show a couple of years ago, you know, what do you expect from him in Summer League? He said, I don't care. The people who like are doing the work, working in the league and all this, like I don't think put that much value on like pure Summer League performances or not. We've seen guys have good Summer League performances then do nothing in the NBA. We've seen guys who don't do well in Summer League do well in the NBA. I just think it's not necessarily reflective. You know, some of the guys on the team like don't play in the G League, don't play overseas, and there's been a couple of stories that are really interesting, by the way. If you read them of like guys that just get brought in for Summer League for a couple weeks who are like rec ball all-stars, they're like, yeah, I'll go to Vegas for 2 weeks, get all my meals and a hotel paid for, and play some basketball. And then they go back to like their normal lives, which isn't playing professional basketball whatsoever. That's not a good level of competition, and in a sense, it's worse than the G League for some of these guys. So it's tough to read into what you're seeing from these players in Summer League when it comes to that sort of stuff. Look, in this final game, Antonio Reeves did well. He's done pretty good as a scorer overall, I've thought, in Summer League. I, again, was very high on him coming out of Kentucky. 18 points on 7 of 16 shooting, 4 of 10 from 3, 5 rebounds, an assist, a steal, a block. Like, no fouls. He has impacted the game in multiple ways along with his scoring. I think that's been really good. But I don't know if he's going to be in the rotation right away. I think that spot is probably reserved for Jordan Hawkins for now. You know, Jordan Ford has kind of been the other real standout, I thought, for New Orleans in Summer League as well. 20 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 of 8 shooting. Played a couple of games with the Sacramento Kings last year, predominantly with the Stockton Kings, their G League team. Throwing him on a two-way, given what he showed you here, I don't think is the worst thing. but I also don't think it's something that the Pelicans necessarily need to do, but I've enjoyed watching him play. It's just been an up and down summer league kind of, well, really all down. It's not up and down. It's been a down, but losing games doesn't matter, right? Like this doesn't, we've seen the Pelicans go 5-0 or 4-1 in summer league and then kind of crap out in the regular season, to use a Vegas term there. So I just don't put too much stock in this from this time. It's fun to see these guys. I enjoy watching basketball, so that part's cool. But the biggest thing for these players is the coaching that they're getting, meeting some of their teammates, going through some of those things. And I think you've seen what you want from certain guys. Yves Missi got better every single game that he played for the most part, I thought. You know, it looked like he was taking instruction well, the coaching well, kind of processing that and then putting into actual like play on the court. One of the things that I think separates him from a Jackson Hayes, and I'm really pushing that right now because that's the feeling I get here, is that they're not similar at all because of his basketball intelligence, because of his desire and competitiveness, which Jackson Hayes is, it's proven at this point, is clearly lacking. Yves Missi doesn't kind of have those negative things associated with him, and in fact has the opposite and the positive versions of that. I'm excited to see what he can do, but I don't know if he's going to be getting minutes on opening night. You know, Carlo Makovic was a revelation. Carlo crazy right here now after, look, a week ago being like, yeah, I'm not sure. The Pelicans, I think, knew what they were getting from him and planned on this because they more or less planned on signing him to the active roster before he even played a Summer League game. Then he did well enough in Summer League that you didn't need to play him anymore. Does that mean that he's ready to be the starter on opening night? Not necessarily. I think he can give you something that you don't have on anyone else on the roster that's maybe NBA ready yet. He can be that vertical lob threat. He's moved well. He's given them some shot blocking, but I do think, you know, again, it's Summer League. It's going to take some acclimation to the NBA, but he will get the opportunity to do that. I don't know if he or Daniel Tice will start on opening night or what they end up doing there just yet, but you kind of saw what you wanted. You saw that Carlo looks like he belongs in the NBA. That's what I'm willing to say with him right now. Still a little skeptical, but he's looked good. That works. That's what you hope to get out of something like this. Given there aren't really open roster spots on this team and you have one two-way deal, you know, any of these other guys weren't really going to have like big options to do much, right? Keon Brooks having 24 points is a great night for him, and that's a cool story, but he was never going to make the team. Same for any of these other guys. I don't see Jordan Ford making the active roster. You know, same for anyone else that really went out there and played a ton. So it's tough to just, you know, I don't know. Like, I don't care about the 0 for 5 then when I'm looking for the players and what they provide and what they do. And you saw that from Carlo Makovic and from Yves Missi and from, you know, Jordan Ford, Antonio Reeves. Hawkins did not play well and, you know, makes me a little bit more down on him going into this season. But overall, we saw what we needed to. And look, it was fun, and I'm happy that they got to play some games and we got to see some games. And it's really kind of simple as that. I like that Aaron Miles, a young up-and-coming coach, got some run coaching this team. You saw some good, you know, out of timeout plays for him, things like that I wanted to see, some like good kind of tactical things. But it's not like they're running NBA offenses in Summer League. They're doing the best they can with rosters that are kind of thrown together last minute just to go out and play some coherent basketball, to be perfectly honest with y'all. And we saw some of that, and that was pretty cool. And I can live with that, right? Like, I'm good with what we saw here from so many of these guys. So overall, pretty happy with, you know, the performances we saw from them, from the players. No one really, I would say, like, other than Makovic, like, jumped out at you and were like, oh my goodness. But it was fun to see him play. And the next step is going to be looking forward towards training camp and watching this team come together a little bit more as they try and figure out what they're doing at center with the way the roster is right now, because we don't know what's going to happen with Brandon Ingram just yet. Maybe the Warriors get desperate. Maybe there's another deal. We'll find out. But right now, looking at the roster as it is, training camp is going to be pretty important for this group as they try and piece this all together, because who starts, who comes off the bench, that's all things we're going to be looking at here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So coming up next, are the Pelicans going to move east if the NBA expands? I'm going to throw some cold water on it. Look, as much as I would love it, absolutely not. They were going to stay in the West. I'll explain why. It has to do with geography. It'll make a little bit more sense, even if it's disappointing, coming up here in the next segment of today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by eBay Motors. My favorite here because eBay Motors keeps my cars running. Whatever you're looking for, whether it is speed, power, style, utility, eBay Motors has you covered. I have the old classic Corvette that I've been working on slowly but surely. It runs, it drives, I drive it around New Orleans. It doesn't have air conditioning in it, and it's time to fix that. It's a almost 50-year-old car. I can easily get all of the parts I need to get the air conditioning system running on eBay Motors and even convert it to like newer chemicals, stuff like that. That's how easy eBay Motors makes it on a 50-year-old car. So your current car, your daily driver right now, you're going to have no problem finding the parts for it because they have over 122 million parts for your vehicle. So you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because I've been there ordering from other places where you put something on and now your wheel won't fit, and what do? Not a fun situation. Avoid that with eBay Motors. And I keep shopping there because the prices are good. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So keep your vehicle alive over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen today. You watching Fox Sports, ESPN on your TV all day long. You're watching other places that aren't talking about the Pelicans when that's what you want to hear. Do you have to turn down the volume with all that yelling? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we're going to wrap up today's show. First, I want to put this out there. If you have questions you want to hear about on Locked On Pelicans, let me know on Twitter or in the comments down below, because we're entering the slow part of the offseason. We all can catch our breath. No summer league games. Trade talk is dying down a little bit here. What are your questions? We'll have time to turn them into shows here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Another thing I saw, I tweeted about this, the other day or on Sunday, was the NBA talking about expansion. That is something that, Adam Silver talked about in kind of his State of the League address during Summer League. And one of the things that kind of gets lost in this is how teams are going to move around. There's two expansion candidates. One is almost certainly going to be Seattle, right? Like almost certainly is going to be Seattle, and you'll get the Seattle Supersonics back. The other team is likely to be Las Vegas. They're building state-of-the-art facilities. You got the Raiders there. They do summer league there. The in-season tournament is there. Everyone just likes Vegas. It makes sense to put a team in Vegas. Both those teams would be in the Western Conference. So if you had two teams to the West, here's where the math gets hard. Only one team goes to the Eastern Conference. There are 30 teams in the NBA right now, 15 and 15 in each conference. If you add two, that's 17 and 15. So one team goes from the West to the Eastern Conference. I would love it tremendously, as we all probably would. And my biggest thing would be fewer West Coast games. Fewer West Coast games that tip off at 9 p.m. Central, so I'm not recording Locked On Pelicans after midnight, sometimes up to like 1 or 2 in the morning, depending on how things go. Would love that. Here's the thing. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry to break the news to you this way, and I'm just going to do it bluntly. It's not going to happen. The teams that would likely move to the East, and it's only one of them, are the Pelicans, the Memphis Grizzlies, or the Minnesota Timberwolves. Here's where New Orleans, it just doesn't work for a couple of reasons. And first and foremost, it's Memphis is actually like just slightly further east on like the longitude lines than New Orleans is, by like barely anything, but it's something more east. The other part of it is Minnesota's more likely to move to the east than any of the other teams, New Orleans or Memphis here. When you look at kind of where the teams are placed, and with this, I do think that when they go to 16 teams in each conference, they might get rid of divisions. Divisions don't really matter now. You're seeded based on your record, not winning the division or anything like that. That can be useful for tiebreakers, things like that. But there's other ways to introduce tiebreakers. I think you'll just get 2 16-team conferences, and the NBA will look at redoing their schedule a little bit. if you look at the Central Division and the Northwest Division, Central Division in the East, Northwest Division obviously in the West. The Northwest Division is the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets, the Portland Trail Blazers, and the Utah Jazz. The geography on that is pretty wide. Look at the Central Division. Chicago Bulls, Cleveland Cavaliers, Detroit Pistons, Indiana Pacers, Milwaukee Bucks. The Minnesota Timberwolves fit right in with that group. And one of the big things for the NBA is reducing travel. So reducing Minnesota making at minimum 3 trips to Portland every year is something that they're probably looking at doing, right? Minimum 3 trips, or at that point, 6 trips to LA because of the 2 teams. Play at least 2 trips out there is what I'm saying. If you can reduce that to 1 to 2 instead of 4 to LA, that's a big deal in terms of reducing travel. That's what the NBA wants to do. I think when the NBA looks at New Orleans and Memphis, right? You're close to the Texas teams. The whole division there is the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, the Rockets, the Spurs, and the Mavericks. You have 3 teams in Texas that New Orleans is close to. Those teams are going to be in the West. They're going to remain in the West because they're so close to those teams. And look, it's closer there than it is to Florida. With the Florida teams, they're likely then going to keep New Orleans in the Western Conference. Trust me, I'm with you. I'd rather them in the East. Would absolutely rather them be in the East just so we can go to bed a little bit earlier. And also the Eastern Conference is the worst conference, the Leastern Conference of the 2. See what I did there? It would be great. It's just likely not going to happen. Now, means we might get more trips to Vegas. That would be kind of cool. That'd be fun. But yeah, I'd rather them be in the East. But it's not going to happen. My bet would be that it's Minnesota. Now, this changes if, Louisville is an expansion team or somewhere else that we're not expecting. If they do Mexico City, that team probably is going to be in the Western Conference too. It could depend, but if we're going with it being Vegas and Seattle, that's probably where we're looking at the Minnesota Timberwolves moving east just to put them closer to those other teams and help with some of the travel, just overall with the numbers, even if it doesn't really impact a ton of other teams. So there you go. Disappointing. I know. They should be in the East. That would be so much better. Start off there. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Summer League is done. Let me know what you want to hear about in the comments down below and on Twitter. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to talk more hoops here.